yeah, you just want to watch layering flesh. Can we just do something real quick? Maybe. This guy that we showed off using the. Let's just chat. Let's take a break. Let's take a break from painting a bunch of leather, and let's paint this guy's back. And I'm just gonna start with well, hey Aptos, why don't you tell me what you want to see? Do you want me to just paint him over with shadow flesh? Is that where you're starting? Or do you want to have it started with something like purple? You tell me. Or do you want like dark flesh? Right now it's shadow flesh with our flesh wash on it, so you can see how much the flesh wash darkened it up. But you tell me, and we'll paint this guy's back. How about that? Live. Your base coat is dark flesh? Okay, then shadow flesh, then tan flesh, basically, right? All right, cool. Let's do it. I'll do it the no frills way. I'm going to put out some dark flesh. Let me see if I can get... I don't remember where my palette cuts off. Yeah, okay, so I got some dark flesh going down here. We'll put some shadow flesh out. I'll use tan flesh because I was going to use the color that you can't buy. But I'll use tan flesh. Hey man, this is what we're here for. And painting skin is one of the biggest nuisances for everybody on the planet, right? So I know it's going to be kind of hard to see what I'm doing on the palette, but bear with me. I will explain it as we go. Begin clip now. We'll port this over to YouTube if it goes well, if I don't screw it up, right? I'm just going to paint over the top of this guy real quick. This is just the model we used as the demo reel for how the washes work. Nothing too fancy. Zoom back in. Right. The problem with doing these is that sometimes I'll try to wait. The problem with doing these quickly on stream is that I'll get wet blending, which I don't know if you're comfortable wet blending or not, right? So, Player J, what's going on? So the ability for us to do this in a real way, you may see a little bit of blending here, but I'll try to keep it. Trash says, do you enjoy co-op games? I've been loving Forbidden Psalm, dark fantasy with some black humor thrown in and co-op using agnostic minis. I haven't really played any co-op games other than like, D&D, I guess. You're still a fantasy player, Olympus? Like Warhammer Fantasy? Awesome. Yeah, Orcs and Gobos were my army in fantasy. I got rid of all my fantasy armies years ago, though. You enjoy diceless systems as well. So many good ones out there these days. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to do it. You're always going to be exposed to some randomness, right? So let's set up on my finger here for you. Make sure I get the right paints. Let's say this is dark flesh. This is where we're starting, okay? Next step, take the dark flesh and the shadow flesh and mix them 50-50 on your palette. Just get a color in between them. You'll know when you're there, because if you add any more of either one of the colors, it'll start to look too much like that color. Okay, so that's where I'm at, right? This is step 1. This is step 2. Okay. With step 2, we just want to start painting over these muscles and painting almost over all of it and just leaving the darkest spots. So the little ripples in between the muscles, right? I'll exaggerate it a little bit, but I do want it to look good at the end so you don't you feel like it's worthwhile doing this. But I'll exaggerate and leave a little bit more darkness than I might ought to. It's going to make him look, you know, like Schwarzenegger muscly, right? Tell there's not a lot of time spent. I'm not worried about blending. I'm literally just covering it in there. I'm using a number 6 brush, so my brush with just a little moisture on it might thin the paint a little bit. You want the paint to be just thin enough, right, to glide onto the model well, but to give you the opacity you want in one go. I don't want to have to come back over this a million times. This is not a blending layer. This is a layer to set up general color. Okay. Right. Again, very, very similar colors. Not going to get a ton of contrast on the model, and you got to be okay with that. Right. As it starts to dry, if you're a little thin, you can come back in. Use this same color to kind of highlight itself. Don't put it all the way into the darkest spots. Like here, I'm just putting on the top of the muscle, not down here. Same thing over on this side. Stop about halfway. Assuming that your light is coming from up above, right? You can just kind of use the same color to give yourself a little bit of highlight. Like that. Okay. Now, typically, I would go straight to shadow flesh on top of this, but you can still add in another blend. If you're not comfortable with your blending for skins and such, then don't be worried about mixing another color. So I'm going to mix another color here. Right. This color is going to be like this. Right? 3. Now with this one, again, we just want to stay up towards the top of these muscle groups. Kind of like what we did with the brighter version of the color we just painted. Start picking out little highlights like that. Get a little swipe. He's got some scars or bulges on the back here that we can go out with. Stipple a little in there. Going to be determined on how your shape of your model is as to where you want a few highlights. Top of the arm there. So this is just going to be such a close color to what you just did that it's going to help you keep your blend together. Just not bright enough to overtake anything unless you just slop it on crazy style. Okay. Then we go to straight shadow flesh. Again, I'm taking most of the water off of the brush just so you're not worried too much about how thin you're going here. Right? So this is now just straight shadow flesh. Again, this is only 2 colors that I'm using so far. Dark flesh, shadow flesh. Okay. Now with this one, again, no real blending, but I just want to catch this area up towards the top. Using lighter touch as I'm making my brush strokes, so my brush strokes are thinner, especially since I'm using a number 6 brush. You might want to use a smaller brush when I'm doing. But a little bit of a lighter brush stroke keeps my lines smaller, means I'm not putting on as much paint every time I touch it. And then I just try to grab these areas where I know that muscle is going to want to be highlighted. Hopefully you can see, because these colors are so close to one another in brightness, I'm not getting huge changes. My skin, as it goes on, Stone doesn't look like it's, you know, putting a pinstripe suit on him. Right. And last but not least, tan flesh. Now here, again, I would normally just jump to tan flesh and do it very thin, but let's take some of the shadow flesh, since we just got to shadow flesh with no mix, and then let's mix some shadow flesh in with our tan flesh. Get a color that's in between the two. That's our fifth color. That. Running out of room to put my numbers up here, and you can't read them anyway, but you can count. And then again, this is just on repeat, man. It's keep brightening up the areas closest to your light source with the flesh. Brighter you go, the quicker you'll stop as you go down the body. You won't put as much highlight like down here, just a little spot. So you build up that contrast. Again, I call this painting yourself into a corner, right? You just kind of want to leave enough of the previous color showing to let your shadow bulk up. Right? And then you just go to tan flesh. And again, you could mix another color in here if you want, right? I can just add a little bit of tan flesh to that other mix, and I could have color number 6. That's just a little more tan flesh inside the shadow flesh. Okay. Again, now just kind of right across the top of the muscle here. Starting to just put a very little bit amount of paint on here. Backing myself into that corner. I don't have enough of the previous color to put too much of this color on before I've just completely overwritten the path, or the last color that we put on here, right? So this is just little bitty touches of paint. But they still have a big effect because you've left all of this contrast as you've gone along. Got this big muscle here, could stand with a little bit more shine, so we'll go a little broader here. Right. Last but not least, now I don't have any mixes I can do. I'm to my final color, which is tan flesh. Okay. This one I'm going to take most of the paint off the brush because I'm using a big ass brush. Almost no paint on this pass. Okay. If I back out of the field there and we do like a super zoom here, you can get a feel for how all those colors go together. And even though I was doing this with the tip of a number 6 and very rough, that gives you a good skin texture. That would survive, right? You could do a whole army like that and be just fine. Yeah, each new layer covers slightly less. That's exactly it. Every color draws in. I call it painting yourself into a corner. Every color you put in goes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until finally you're just doing, you know, like a little bitty dot of this brightest color, little bitty dot of this brightest color. A little bit more across here because it's up towards the top. You know, maybe I'm leaving too much shadow at the neck or whatever, but you know, you're just putting a little bit at the very top at that point. Right? And you can see by doing that, we've left a lot of shadow, got a good highlight. You can set all of your values up. I mean, that took us all of a couple of minutes, right? Now, you can do this a lot smoother, right? I'm blowing through this to show you how to get those colors mixed so that you get good blending, even when I'm not blending, right? I'm just hacking the paint on there, but the colors do all of the blending, right? We turn 3 colors into 7, right? We use dark flesh, shadow flesh, tan flesh, right? So 3 colors became 7 because I mixed 2 in between each color, right? And that's what gives you that nice steady blend up through all of your skin tones. Right now, this is darker skin. So if you wanted to lighten this up, you could even go in. So here's a good way to look at this. If you want to brighten your skin up, I can go back with a lot of water on the brush. Right now, I can glaze with shadow flesh. Right, so I've got a very thin version of shadow flesh here, and I can put shadow flesh over the top of this whole thing as a glaze and instantly brighten this entire area that we did up, but not lose all of my transition, right? And I would do that with the glaze wash medium, by the way. I know you don't have any, so I just did it with water. Right? So you've set up your skin to look good, and now you can just go back and glaze that shadow flesh on there and brighten it up if it's too bright. You could glaze dark flesh over it if by the time you get done with all of this it's too bright. You can darken it up. You're never locked in. If you do this staging and you get it to where at least it moves from dark to bright on every muscle group, if you left a little bit of darkness, glaze some brightness over it at the end. If you left it too dark, or left it too bright, you can glaze some darkness over it and put our flesh wash over it, right? There you go. This is what people mean when they say do 90% each layer, I guess, right? I call it the rule of 50%, right? If you're going to paint a line, right? Or if you're going to do a blend, you know, you're starting with a dark color here, right? And I paint that dark color on all of the skin like this, okay? Then we come back with the mix where we took the shadow flesh and the dark flesh, right? We got that color in between, that color number 2. And then I go in and I start painting generally half of it, right? Let's just go with a rule of 50%, right? Just paint like half or maybe a little bit more than half of that line with your blended color, okay? Then you take your next blended color and you paint half of that line or area, right? I'm saying line, but you know, obviously I mean half of that area, right? Then you go and you do your next color and you do half of that area. Then half again. You see how you're starting to run out of space here, right? Half again. And finally half again. And last but not least, with the brightest color all by itself. Now this is wet blending a little bit here, but now we just can do our highlight. We ran out of space. So now dividing this up becomes very hard because you're just going to have a line. You know, not a whole lot you can do here. And you can see here, we're getting a little bit of wet blending on my skin, but this is painting skin. Now, if you want the skin to be lighter, you do all of these further this way, right? You do like you said, maybe it's 90%, right? So maybe this first color started all the way down here, and then you did bigger blotches of everything else. So here at the rule of 50% keeps your model with a lot of stark contrast. Had we done it where we went in and did the mixed colors earlier on, like maybe we put this color here, right? We started that blend earlier. Then we start Your other color 75% maybe instead of 50. Now you can immediately see what's going to happen. Right? 75% instead of 50. 75% instead of 50. And 75% instead of 50. Now your skin's a lot brighter. So staging that, right, when you're starting dark, stage it somewhere from like 50 to 75% of that darkness you're covering up, and then do the same thing with each, preceding each subsequent color. And that's how you get all your blend. You have all learned how to count, right? There you go. Just really quick skin tutorial using 3 colors. Show them. Dark flesh, shadow flesh, tan flesh. Okay? 3 colors turn into 7 just by blending the ones in between and staging them up, how you need. And as you get more confident with your colors and your layering, then you just start blending them however you want. Bingo. We will cut that and post that over on the YouTubes for all to use.